At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched under the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at Dobodura Airfield in New Guinea, watching Lieutenant Robert Hayes climb into the cockpit for a mission he probably wouldn't survive. McKenna's hands were still shaking from what he'd done 8 hours earlier. The 6-inch piece of piano wire he'd illegally installed was hidden deep inside the throttle quadrant where no one would see it during pre-flight. If it worked, Hayes might come home. If it failed, Hayes would die in a turning fight with a Zero, and McKenna would face a court-martial for unauthorized modifications to a combat aircraft. The morning air already hung thick with humidity. Mechanics shouted across the flight line. Engines coughed and roared. McKenna wiped sweat from his forehead and tried to look calm. He'd violated direct orders from 5th Air Force Engineering. He'd ignored 3 separate bulletins prohibiting field modifications. He'd worked alone in the dark with borrowed tools and a wire scavenged from a destroyed piano in Port Moresby. But he'd watched 11 pilots die in 6 weeks. 11 men who'd done everything right. 11 Americans who'd lost turning fights they should have won. And McKenna knew exactly why they'd died. James McKenna was 26 years old, farm kid from outside Duluth, Minnesota. His father owned a tractor repair shop. McKenna had grown up with grease under his fingernails and a wrench in his hand. He could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded. He understood how machines worked not from manuals but from feeling, from listening, from thousands of hours making broken things run again. He'd enlisted in January 1942, the month after Pearl Harbor. The Army Air Force needed mechanics more than pilots. McKenna scored high on mechanical aptitude tests and low on everything else. They sent him to technical school in California. 6 months later, he shipped out to Australia. By March 1943, he'd transferred to the 475th Fighter Group in New Guinea, maintaining P-38 Lightnings. The P-38 was supposed to be America's answer to Japanese air superiority. Twin engines, heavy firepower, fast. But McKenna had been in theater 4 months now, and he'd watched the body count climb. Not from mechanical failure, not from being outnumbered, from something else. Something the pilots whispered about but couldn't quite explain. "The airplane won't turn when I need it to," they'd say. "There's a lag," they'd tell him. "The Zero reverses, and I can't follow." McKenna had been assigned to maintain 6 aircraft. 5 different pilots rotated through those planes. By mid-July, he'd gotten to know them. Their habits, their superstitions, the way Captain Morrison always touched his left wingtip before climbing in, how Lieutenant Davies kept a photo of his wife tucked in his flight suit, how Sergeant Phillips sang while he walked his pre-flight. The P-38 had one fatal problem killing pilots every single day, and nobody in command would admit it existed. The twin Allison engines required separate throttles. Unlike single-engine fighters where you pushed one lever, P-38 pilots managed 2 throttles side by side. Push both forward to accelerate, pull both back to decelerate. But in combat, especially during hard-turning fights, those throttles had to move in perfect synchronization. If one engine got slightly more power than the other, the airplane would yaw. It would skid. It would lose speed and position. The problem was simple. The throttle linkage had too much play, too much slop. When a pilot yanked both levers back hard in a tight turn, one throttle would respond a fraction of a second before the other. That fraction of a second meant death. Lieutenant Richard Morrison died on July 19, 1943. He was 24 years old, history teacher from Philadelphia. He'd flown 16 missions without a single kill. Morrison wasn't flashy. He followed orders. He stayed in formation. He did everything by the book. On July 19th, his flight jumped 6 zeros over Leh Harbor. Morrison got on the tail of a Zero and fired. Missed. The Zero reversed hard left. Morrison tried to follow. McKenna later read the wingman's report. Morrison pulled both throttles back to tighten his turn. His left engine responded first. The P-38 yawed right. Just for a moment. Just enough. The Zero completed its reversal and came around behind Morrison. 3 seconds of cannon fire. Morrison's P-38 broke apart at 4,000 feet. McKenna helped pack Morrison's footlocker. Found the photo of Morrison's wife. Found letters Morrison had written but hadn't mailed yet. Lieutenant Thomas Davies died on July 27, 1943. He was 22 years old. Engineering student from Michigan. 8 missions. 0 kills. Davies had asked McKenna about the throttle response just 2 days before he died. "There's something wrong," Davies had said. "I can feel it." McKenna had filed a report with engineering. They'd tested Davies' aircraft on the ground. Everything met specifications. "Pilot technique issue," they'd written. On July 27th, Davies engaged a 0 at low altitude near Buna. Same scenario. 0 reversed. Davies tried to follow. Throttle desynchronization. The P-38 skidded wide. Davies overcompensated. His left wing hit a tree at 180 miles per hour. The aircraft cartwheeled into the jungle. They didn't recover his body for 3 days. McKenna had stopped sleeping well after Davies died. The throttle linkage problem wasn't complicated. Each Allison V1710 engine had its own carburetor. Each carburetor had its own throttle butterfly valve. Each valve connected to its own cable running back to the cockpit. Those cables pulled the throttle levers. But cables stretched. Cables wore. Cables accumulated friction in their housings. Under normal conditions, the system worked fine. Cruising flight. Formation flying. Even gentle maneuvers. The slight difference in throttle response didn't matter. But combat was different. When a P-38 pilot fought for his life in a turning engagement, he needed instant response. When a 0 reversed, the American pilot had maybe 2 seconds to follow. He'd yank both throttles. His survival depended on both engines responding identically at that exact moment. Instead, one engine would spool down 0.3 seconds before the other. That fraction of a second delay meant death. The airplane would skid. The nose would yaw. The pilot would lose his firing solution or worse, lose position entirely. The 0 would complete its reversal, and the American would be dead. McKenna had figured this out by July 20th, the day after Morrison died. He'd spent 6 hours with Morrison's aircraft, cycling the throttles, measuring the response. He'd found a 0.4-second delay between left and right engine spool down. He'd documented it. He'd written a detailed report to 5th Air Force Engineering. Their response came back on July 23rd. Throttle response times are within manufacturer specifications. No modification authorized. Reference Allison Technical Order 1710-08-2. Warranty will be void if unauthorized changes are made to throttle systems. Within specifications. Warranty concerns. No authorization. McKenna had read that letter 3 times. He'd wanted to crumple it up. He'd wanted to fly to Brisbane and shove it down someone's throat. Instead, he'd filed it carefully and gone back to work. Sergeant William Phillips died on August 2, 1943. He was 23 years old. Truck driver from Oklahoma. Phillips was the one who sang. Country songs mostly. He had a good voice. Phillips' mission was a bomber escort to WWII. The formation got jumped by 15 zeros at 13:20 hours. Phillips and his wingman broke left to engage. The radio transcript was in the mission report. McKenna read it 5 times. 20:14. Phillips: "I've got the leader, staying with him." P-31. Wingman: "He's reversing right, Bill. Brake right." 13:20:35. Phillips: "I'm with him. I'm with him." 13:20:38. Wingman: "You're skidding wide. Pull up." 13:20:41. Phillips: "No response." 20:44. Wingman: "Oh God, oh Jesus." Phillips is hit. The 0 had reversed hard right. Phillips had tried to follow. His throttles had desynchronized. His P-38 had skidded left while his nose was pointed right. He'd lost 40 knots of airspeed in 2 seconds. The 0 had rolled inverted, pulled through and shot Phillips from 200 feet away. Phillips' right engine caught fire. He'd managed to bail out at 2,000 feet, but his parachute had only partially deployed. He'd hit the ocean at over 100 miles per hour. They never recovered his body. McKenna attended the memorial service. The chaplain talked about sacrifice, about duty, about God's plan. McKenna stood in the back and clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. The deaths continued. 2 more pilots in the first week of August. Different circumstances. Same outcome. The P-38s couldn't stay with zeros in turning fights. American pilots had speed. They had firepower. They had armor. But when the fight went horizontal, when it became a turning battle, the zeros killed them. By August 10th, the 475th Fighter Group had lost 37 P-38s in 6 weeks. 12 to mechanical failure, 8 to being outnumbered, 17 to turning engagements where the P-38 should have had the advantage. The pattern was obvious. The pilots knew it. The mechanics knew it. Command knew it but couldn't admit it. The P-38 was supposed to be superior. Lockheed said so. The engineering specs said so. The publicity said so. But the men kept dying. McKenna filed 2 more engineering reports. Both came back with the same response. Within specifications. No modifications authorized. He'd tried going through his squadron maintenance officer. The captain had been sympathetic but powerless. "My hands are tied," he'd said. "If we modify aircraft without authorization and someone dies, we're all going to prison." McKenna understood the logic. He hated it, but he understood it. The military ran on procedure, on chain of command, on authorization and approval. You didn't just fix things because you thought you knew better. You followed the system, but the system was killing people. Lieutenant Robert Hayes arrived at Dobodura on August 14, 1943, fresh from the States, 22 years old. Farm kid from Iowa, which made McKenna like him immediately. Hayes had that Midwestern openness, that genuine quality. He shook McKenna's hand and asked his name, and actually remembered it. Hayes drew one of McKenna's aircraft, number 4267543. A good airplane mechanically. Clean engines, tight airframe, and absolutely standard throttle linkage with 0.35 seconds of desynchronization that would probably get Hayes killed within a week. On August 16th, Hayes came to find McKenna after dinner. The sun was setting. Most of the other mechanics had gone to the enlisted tent to play cards. Hayes found McKenna doing paperwork in the maintenance shack. "Can I ask you something?" Hayes said. McKenna looked up. "Sure." The other pilots talk about the throttles. Hayes sat down on a toolbox. "They say there's something wrong. They say the airplane won't respond right in a turn." McKenna put down his pen. "What did your instructors tell you in flight school?" "They said the P-38 takes training. That you have to keep the throttles synchronized manually. That it's pilot technique." Hayes paused. "But the guys here say it's not technique. They say good pilots are dying because of it." "What do you think?" McKenna asked. "I think..." Hayes looked at his hands. "I think I'm going on my first combat mission tomorrow morning. And I think if there's something wrong with my airplane, I'd like to know about it." McKenna was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. He pulled out his engineering reports, all of them. The measurements, the documentation, the responses from Brisbane. He laid them out on the workbench. "The throttles desynchronize under combat loads," McKenna said. "One engine responds slower than the other. It causes the airplane to skid in hard turns. It gets pilots killed. I've reported it 5 times. Engineering says everything is within specifications, and no modifications are authorized." Hayes read through the papers. His hands started to shake slightly. "Is there a fix?" "Yes." "Can you do it?" "Not without authorization." "But you could do it?" "Mechanically, you know how to fix it?" McKenna nodded. "It's simple. Link the throttles together so they move as one unit. 6 inches of wire. 20 minutes of work." Hayes looked at him. Really looked at him. "If you don't fix it, what happens? You fly the mission tomorrow. Maybe you get lucky. Maybe you don't see combat. Maybe you engage and survive anyway." "And if I'm not lucky?" McKenna didn't answer. "Is there anything you can do?" Hayes asked quietly. McKenna waited until 200 hours. The flight line was empty. One guard at the far end, barely awake. The moon was behind clouds. Good. He carried his toolbox across the hardstand to aircraft 4267543. Hayes' airplane. His flashlight beam stayed low. His hands were already sweating. This was it. This was the line. Once he started, there was no going back. If Hayes died because of McKenna's modification, they'd court-martial him. If Hayes survived but someone discovered the unauthorized work, they'd court-martial him. If the modification caused any kind of mechanical issue, any problem at all, McKenna would spend the rest of the war in a military prison, but Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. McKenna opened the left cockpit access panel. His flashlight illuminated the throttle quadrant. 2 throttle levers, 2 separate cables running down into the fuselage, 2 separate paths to 2 separate engines. The solution was absurdly simple. Link the throttles together. Make them move as a single unit. The pilot would still have 2 levers, but they'd be mechanically connected. Push 1, both moved. Pull 1, both moved. Perfect synchronization. Instant response. McKenna had scavenged the wire 3 days earlier from a destroyed piano in Port Moresby. Some Army logistics officer had tried to ship a piano to his quarters. The ship had taken a near miss from a Japanese bomb. The piano had been ruined. McKenna had taken 20 feet of wire from inside. High-carbon steel. Extremely strong. Perfect for this. He cut a 6-inch piece. He drilled 2 small holes in the throttle lever assembly. His hands shook. The drill bits skipped twice. He had to stop and breathe. 8 minutes of work. Threading the wire. Creating the linkage. Testing the movement. The throttles now moved in perfect unison. Impossible to desynchronize them. Both engines would get identical input at identical times. McKenna tested it 40 times. Forward and back. Smooth and jerky. Hard pulls. Gentle movements. Perfect synchronization every time. He closed the access panel. He wiped down his tools. He erased any evidence he'd been there. The wire was hidden deep inside where no pre-flight inspection would find it. Unless someone specifically opened that panel and looked, they'd never know. McKenna walked back across the hardstand at 03:14 hours. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. If this failed, Hayes would crash and McKenna would be responsible. If this worked, McKenna had just violated every regulation in the book. At 06:30, Hayes did his pre-flight walk-around. McKenna watched from the maintenance shack. Hayes checked the control surfaces, checked the engines, checked everything on the list. He never opened the throttle quadrant panel. At 06:25, Hayes climbed into the cockpit. McKenna's mouth was dry. His heart hammered. Hayes started both engines. They caught smoothly. Hayes ran through his checklist. At 07:42, Hayes taxied to the runway, and Technical Sergeant James McKenna watched the airplane he'd illegally modified roll toward the Pacific sky. At 07:42 hours, Lieutenant Robert Hayes took off from Dobodura Airfield. His flight consisted of 4 P-38s. Their mission was fighter sweep over Leh. Intelligence expected Japanese air activity. Hayes flew number 3 position. His first combat mission. McKenna stood at the edge of the flight line. He watched all 4 Lightnings climb into the morning sky. They banked northeast. The sound of their engines faded. McKenna stood there for another 5 minutes, just staring. Then he went back to work. He had 3 other aircraft that needed maintenance. He tried to focus. His hands kept shaking. The mission brief had estimated 2 hours. Takeoff at 07:42. Return around 09:45. That meant McKenna had 123 minutes to wait. 123 minutes to wonder if he'd just killed a 22-year-old farm kid from Iowa. He couldn't eat. He tried. The mess hall served something that was supposedly eggs. McKenna pushed them around his plate and gave up. The engagement started at 08:14 hours. McKenna wouldn't know that until later. The radio logs showed it. Hayes' flight had been at 15,000 feet north of Leh when someone spotted the zeros. Bandits, 2 o'clock low. Count 8. The flight leader decided to engage. 4 P-38s dove on 8 zeros. Not great odds, but acceptable. The attack run worked perfectly. The zeros never saw them coming. Hayes lined up on a 0 from behind and above. His first combat shot. The engagement rang, logged it. Sha 814-33. Hayes. I've got the trailer. Engaging. 814-41. Flight lead. Take your shot. Brake left after. 814-44. Hayes. Firing. Hayes fired from 400 yards. Too far. The rounds fell short. The Zero pilot saw the tracers and broke hard left. Violent maneuver. The Zero disappeared under Hayes' nose. This was the moment. This was the exact scenario that had killed Morrison, Davies, Phillips, and 14 others. The enemy reversed hard. The American pilot tried to follow. The throttles desynchronized. The P-38 skidded. The pilot lost position, and the Zero came around for the kill. Hayes yanked his stick left. He pulled both throttles back hard to tighten his turn. McKenna's modification activated. Both throttles moved as one. Both engines spooled down identically. Zero delay. Perfect response. That's when Hayes felt it. He'd been briefed about the throttle problem. He knew what to expect. He knew the airplane should skid slightly. Should yaw? Should feel mushy. Instead, the airplane responded instantly. No delay. No lag. No yaw. The P-38 snapped into the turn like it was on rails. Hayes couldn't believe what he was feeling. The airplane was turning inside the Zero, actually turning inside it. Every instructor had told him that was impossible. The Zero was the king of turning. You didn't try to outturn a Zero. You used speed and firepower. But Hayes was outturning this Zero. He pulled the stick harder. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. His vision started to gray at the edges. The Zero was 300 yards ahead, turning left as hard as it could. Hayes was turning harder. He was closing the angle. The Zero pilot realized it. Started to reverse right. Too late. Hayes was already inside his turn radius. Hayes put the gun sight pipper on the Zero's fuselage. Led it slightly. Squeezed the trigger. 4 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon opened fire. The sound was incredible. The entire airplane vibrated. Spent shell casings flew past the canopy. The rounds walked up the Zero's fuselage. From tail to cockpit, Hayes saw pieces coming off, saw the canopy shatter. The Zero rolled inverted and dove straight down. Black smoke poured from the engine. Hayes watched it spiral into the jungle below. No parachute. Route 815-02. Hayes. I got him. I got him. 0815-205. Flight lead. Good kill. Brake right. 2 more coming in. 2 more Zeros dove from above. They'd seen their wingman die. Now they wanted revenge. They came in fast. Maybe 350 miles per hour. Hayes saw them. Saw their gun flashes. The old Hayes would have run. Would have pushed throttles forward and used the P-38 speed advantage to disengage. That's what the tactics manual said. Don't dogfight with Zeros. But Hayes had just discovered his P-38 could turn. Really turn. And that changed everything. He reversed hard right. Pulled the throttles back. The airplane responded instantly. Again. Perfect synchronization. The P-38 came around so fast the Zeros overshot. They'd expected Hayes to run. He'd turned into them instead. Now Hayes was behind both of them. They split. One went left, one went right. Hayes picked the one going left. Followed him into the turn. The Zero pilot was good. He reversed twice. Tried to shake Hayes. Couldn't do it. The P-38 stayed glued to his 6 o'clock. Every time the Zero turned, Hayes turned harder. Every time the Zero reversed, Hayes was already there. The throttles responded perfectly. The engines worked in perfect harmony. Hayes got inside 200 yards. Put the pipper on the Zero. Fired. 3-second burst. The Zero's right wing exploded. The entire wing folded back and tore off. The Zero tumbled. The pilot bailed out at 8,000 feet. His parachute opened. 6:41. Hayes. That's 2. Holy shit, that's 2. The second Zero broke off. Dove away. Hayes wanted to follow, but his flight leader called him back. Reform, reform. We're Winchester and heading home. Winchester meant out of ammunition. Hayes checked his guns. Empty. He'd used everything. 2 kills on his first mission. The flight regrouped and turned southeast toward Dobodura. Hayes's hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. The adrenaline made him feel like he could punch through steel. But more than that, he couldn't stop thinking about the airplane, about how it had responded, how it had turned. Something was different. Something was very, very different. The other 3 pilots were on the radio, talking about the engagement, comparing notes. Hayes stayed quiet. He was thinking about the throttles, about the way they'd moved, about McKenna's face when Hayes had asked if there was a fix. They landed at Dobodura at 9:28 hours. 14 minutes early. Hayes taxied to his revetment and shut down the engines. His crew chief ran up with a ladder. Hayes climbed out. His legs almost gave out. The crew chief had to steady him. "You okay, Lieutenant?" "Yeah." Hayes pulled off his helmet. "Yeah, I'm good." McKenna was standing 30 feet away, trying to look casual, trying to look like he wasn't about to vomit from stress. Hayes saw him, walked straight toward him. McKenna's heart stopped. Hayes got close enough that only McKenna could hear. It worked. McKenna's knees almost buckled. "What?" "Whatever you did, it worked. The airplane turned like nothing I've ever felt." Hayes was grinning. Huge farm kid grin. "I got 2 of them. Turned inside both of them. They couldn't shake me." McKenna couldn't speak. He just nodded. "How many others?" Hayes asked quietly. "Just yours. Can you do more?" McKenna looked around. "I could get court-martialed. You could also save every pilot in this squadron." Hayes put his hand on McKenna's shoulder. "Whatever you did, it's the difference between life and death. I'm telling you." That airplane turned like it was on a string. 6 other pilots had watched Hayes' engagement from altitude. They'd seen a P-38 outturn 2 zeros. They'd heard Hayes' kill calls. They'd seen him come home alive and excited after his first mission. At lunch, they cornered him. "What happened up there?" "Your airplane did something," Captain Morrison's replacement said. "I've never seen a lightning maneuver like that." Hayes looked at McKenna across the mess tent. "I don't know. Maybe I got lucky, but the pilots knew. They could feel it. Something was different about Hayes' airplane." By 1400 hours on August 17th, 3 more pilots had quietly asked McKenna if he could check their throttles. Not official requests, just quiet conversations. "Hey, Sergeant, when you get a minute, could you take a look at something?" McKenna knew what they were really asking. Hayes had talked. Not officially, not loudly, but in that way pilots talk to each other. Over cards, over drinks. In the quiet moments, Hayes' airplane turns different. Something's modified. McKenna felt the walls closing in. More modifications meant more evidence, more risk, more chances to get caught, but more pilots coming home alive. Captain Richard Holden found McKenna at 15:30 hours. Holden was a flight leader. 7 months in theater. 19 missions. 1 kill. He'd lost his wingman 2 weeks earlier to a 0 in a turning fight. "Sergeant McKenna, walk with me." They walked away from the maintenance area. Holden didn't speak until they were alone. Then he stopped and turned. "I watched Hayes today. From 18,000 feet, I saw his engagement. That wasn't normal P-38 performance." McKenna said nothing. "I'm not going to ask what you did." Holden looked at him directly. "I'm going to ask if you can do it to my airplane." "Sir, I don't—" "Stop!" Holden's voice was hard. "I've been flying these airplanes for 7 months. I know what they can and cannot do. Hayes Lightning did something I've never seen. I've lost 8 friends since March. 8, all in turning engagements. So I'm asking you directly. Can you do to my airplane what you did to Hayes?" McKenna stood there. Court-martial on one side, dead pilots on the other. "Yes, sir." "When?" "Tonight." "Will it work?" "It worked for Hayes." Holden nodded. "That's good enough for me." That night, McKenna modified 2 more aircraft. Holden's and Lieutenant Chen's, same procedure. 6-inch piece of piano wire. Link the throttles. 20 minutes per airplane. McKenna worked in the dark again. His hands didn't shake this time. On August 18th, Holden and Chen both flew combat missions. Holden got 1 kill. Chen got 2. Both reported the same thing. The airplane turned like it was transformed, like it was a completely different aircraft. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft, all under cover of darkness, all unauthorized, all absolutely illegal. He'd run out of piano wire. He'd started using safety wire instead, thinner but strong enough. The pattern was obvious now. Modified aircraft were getting kills. Unmodified aircraft were surviving but not scoring. The pilots knew, they all knew. A quiet underground network formed. If you want to survive, get McKenna to check your airplane. The Japanese pilots started noticing something had changed around August 25th. The American Lightnings were suddenly fighting differently. They weren't running anymore. They were turning. They were staying in the fight. And they were winning. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai was the highest-scoring Japanese ace in the area. 64 confirmed kills. He'd been dominating American fighters since 1942. He'd shot down 6 P-38s in July alone. On August 27th, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Finschhafen. He used his standard tactics. Reverse hard. Pull the American into a turning fight. Wait for the Lightning to skid wide. Then complete the reversal and shoot. But this Lightning didn't skid. It turned inside him. Sakai had to break off, had to run. For the first time in months, a P-38 had forced him to disengage. Sakai reported it to his squadron commander. Something has changed with the American fighters. They are turning much better. The commander dismissed it. Impossible. The P-38 cannot outturn a Zero. You must have misjudged. But other Japanese pilots reported the same thing. The Americans were suddenly dangerous in turning engagements. The easy kills were gone. By September 1st, the statistics told the story. In July, the 475th Fighter Group had lost 23 P-38s in air combat. They'd shot down 31 Japanese aircraft, barely even. In August, they'd lost 8 P-38s in air combat. They'd shot down 67 Japanese aircraft, 8-to-1 kill ratio. Something had changed. Everyone knew it. The pilots knew it. The Japanese knew it. But command still didn't know. Until September 3rd, a maintenance officer from 5th Air Force Engineering arrived at Dobodura for a routine inspection. Captain Wesley Barnes. He was checking compliance with technical orders, making sure no unauthorized modifications had been made, making sure everything was by the book. He opened the throttle quadrant panel on aircraft 4267821, found the wire linkage, immediately knew it wasn't factory standard. He checked 3 more aircraft, found the same modification on all of them, unauthorized, undocumented, completely against regulations. Barnes went straight to the squadron commander. "Sir, someone has been modifying aircraft without authorization. Multiple aircraft. This is a serious violation." The squadron commander was Lieutenant Colonel George Smith. He'd been watching the kill ratios. He'd been watching his pilots come home alive. He'd been watching the entire dynamic of the air war shift. "How many aircraft are modified?" Smith asked. "At least 12 that I've found." "What does the modification do?" "Links the throttles together for synchronized response." "Does it work?" Barnes hesitated. "Sir, that's not the point. It's unauthorized." "Does it work?" "Based on the combat results, yes, sir." "It appears to work extremely well." Smith thought for a long moment. "Who did the modifications?" "I believe it was Technical Sergeant McKenna." "Bring him in." McKenna stood at attention in the commander's tent. Barnes was there. Smith was behind his desk. A court-martial felt inevitable. "Sergeant McKenna," Smith said, "Captain Barnes tells me you've been modifying aircraft without authorization." "Yes, sir." "You know that's a violation of multiple regulations." "Yes, sir." "You know I could court-martial you." "Yes, sir." Smith picked up a piece of paper. "I have the combat reports from August. 8 pilots in this squadron are alive right now because they could outturn Japanese fighters. 8. They all flew modified aircraft. Your modified aircraft." McKenna said nothing. "Captain Barnes wants to charge you. He wants everything by the book. He wants you in prison." Smith looked at Barnes, then back at McKenna. "But I want my pilots to come home. So here's what's going to happen. Captain Barnes is going to return to Brisbane. He's going to file a report stating that he found an innovative field modification that significantly improves P-38 combat performance. He's going to recommend it for fleet-wide adoption. And we're never going to mention your name." Barnes started to protest. Smith cut him off. "That's an order, Captain." Captain Barnes did exactly what he was told. His report reached 5th Air Force Engineering on September 10, 1943. It described the throttle linkage modification in detail. It included combat statistics. It recommended immediate testing and potential adoption. The engineering team at Brisbane was furious, not because the modification was bad, because it proved they'd been wrong, because a sergeant in the field had solved a problem they'd insisted didn't exist, but they couldn't ignore the results. 8-to-1 kill ratio in August versus barely even in July. That was impossible to dismiss. They flew a test aircraft to Brisbane. They ran it through engineering evaluation. They tested the linkage under every condition they could imagine. They tried to find something wrong with it. They couldn't. On September 28, 1943, 5th Air Force issued Technical Order 38-1-47. Field Modification, P-38. Throttle Linkage Synchronization. It authorized all maintenance units to install the modification. It provided detailed instructions. It made McKenna's illegal wire link an official part of the aircraft. The technical order never mentioned McKenna's name. The official story was that 5th Air Force Engineering had developed the modification after analyzing combat reports. Nobody questioned it. Nobody dug deeper. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation received a copy of the technical order in October. They immediately began incorporating the modification into new production aircraft. By December 1943, every P-38 rolling off the assembly line in Burbank had synchronized throttles. They called it the Combat Throttle Improvement. Marketing material credited Lockheed engineers with developing it. McKenna's name appeared nowhere. By January 1944, every P-38 in the Pacific Theater had been modified. Europe followed by March. More than 2,000 aircraft total. The impact was immediate and sustained. P-38 units that had struggled to maintain parity with Japanese fighters suddenly dominated. The kill ratios shifted dramatically. American pilots stopped treating turning engagements as suicide. They started seeking them out. Lieutenant Robert Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions. He shot down 11 Japanese aircraft. He returned to Iowa in December 1945. He married his high school girlfriend. He farmed corn and soybeans for 40 years. He died in 2003 at age 82. Hayes and McKenna stayed in touch. They wrote letters occasionally. They called each other every December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, their private tradition. In those calls, Hayes would always say the same thing. "You saved my life, Jim. First mission. I'd be dead without you." And McKenna would always say the same thing. "You gave me the guts to do it." Captain Richard Holden survived the war. 27 missions, 8 kills. He became a commercial airline pilot. He flew 747s for United Airlines for 30 years. Lieutenant David Chen survived the war. 41 missions, 13 kills. He became an engineer. He worked for Boeing. Of the 9 pilots who flew McKenna's modified aircraft in August 1943, 8 survived the war. The 9th, Lieutenant William Crawford, died in November 1943 when his engine failed on takeoff. Mechanical failure, nothing to do with the modification. The statistical analysis came much later. In 1987, a military historian named Dr. Robert Jackson was researching P-38 combat effectiveness. He noticed the dramatic shift in kill ratios in August 1943. He started digging. He found the technical order. He found the combat reports. He found references to field modifications in squadron maintenance logs. He tracked down veterans, found Hayes, found Chen, found 5 other pilots who'd flown modified aircraft. They all told him the same story, about a sergeant named McKenna, about illegal modifications done at night, about throttles that suddenly worked the way they should have from the beginning. Jackson found McKenna in Minnesota, 70 years old, still fixing tractors. McKenna had never told the story publicly, never sought credit, never even told his wife exactly what he'd done in the war. Jackson convinced him to talk. They recorded 6 hours of interviews. McKenna walked through the entire sequence. The deaths, the engineering reports, the piano wire, the decision to break regulations, the fear that Hayes would die because of him. Jackson asked the critical question, How many lives do you think the modification saved? McKenna thought for a long time. I don't know, dozens, maybe more. Jackson did the math. Based on combat loss rates before and after August 1943, based on 2,000 modified aircraft, based on 3 years of combat operations, he estimated the modification saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives, possibly more. McKenna cried when Jackson told him that number. 70-year-old man, sitting in his tractor repair shop in Minnesota, crying. I didn't know, he said. I just wanted Hayes to come home. The Japanese perspective came from post-war interviews with surviving pilots. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, who lived until 2000, talked about the sudden shift in August 1943. The American Lightnings became much more dangerous, he said in a 1998 interview. Before August, we could outturn them easily. After August, they could stay with us. We lost the advantage. Many of my friends died because of it. Sakai never knew why the American fighters had suddenly improved. He assumed it was better training or new tactics. He never knew it was a 6-inch piece of piano wire installed by a sergeant in the dark. The modification changed more than just survival rates. It changed American tactics. P-38 units that had been taught to avoid turning engagements started seeking them out. The Lightning went from defensive fighter to aggressive hunter. That shift changed the air war in the Pacific. By mid-1944, the Allies had clear air superiority. The Japanese couldn't replace their losses. Their best pilots were dead. Their training pipeline had collapsed, and American P-38s were dominating the sky. McKenna's modification wasn't the only factor, but it was a significant one. It turned a vulnerable aircraft into a dangerous one at exactly the moment when the war was shifting. James McKenna returned to Minnesota in January 1946. He'd spent 3 years in the Pacific. He'd maintained aircraft through the end of the war. He'd made tech sergeant, then master sergeant. He'd received a Bronze Star for meritorious service in maintenance operations. The citation never mentioned the throttle modification. He went back to his father's tractor repair shop. He married a local girl named Helen in 1947. They had 3 children. He fixed farm equipment for 45 years. He never talked about the war unless someone asked directly. And even then he kept it brief. I was a mechanic, he'd say. Worked on P-38s. Made sure the boys could fly. When people asked if he'd done anything special, he'd shake his head. Just kept the airplanes running. Nothing special about that. His family didn't know. His children didn't know. His wife knew something had happened because of the nightmares. For years after the war, McKenna would wake up shouting, calling out names. Morrison, Davies, Phillips, Hayes. Helen would hold him until he calmed down. She never pressed him for details. She figured he'd talk when he was ready. He never was. The story might have died with him. But Dr. Jackson's 1987 research brought it into the light. Jackson published a paper in the Journal of Military History. Field Innovation in the Pacific Theater. The P-38 Throttle Modification of 1943. McKenna's name appeared on page 12. A local newspaper in Duluth picked up the story. They ran a feature article. Local veterans' wartime innovation saved dozens of lives. McKenna's children read it. They called him. Dad, why didn't you ever tell us? Didn't seem important, McKenna said. Not important. Dad, you saved 80 people. I saved Hayes. That's all I was trying to do. Just Hayes. The rest just kind of happened. That was the truth as McKenna saw it. He hadn't been trying to change the war. He hadn't been trying to innovate. He'd been trying to keep one 22-year-old farm kid from Iowa alive for one more mission. Everything else had spiraled from that single decision. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees sitting in air-conditioned offices. Not through proper procedure or chain of command. Through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives. Through people who decide that one life is worth breaking the rules for, and then discover that breaking the rules saves dozens. McKenna died in 1992 at age 75. Heart attack, quick. His funeral was in Duluth. Robert Hayes flew in from Iowa. David Chen flew in from Seattle. 4 other pilots McKenna had never met came. They'd heard the story. They'd flown modified P-38s. They wanted to pay respects to the man who'd kept them alive. At the funeral, Hayes spoke. "Jim McKenna saved my life on my first combat mission. He risked his career, his freedom, and his future because he couldn't stand watching pilots die. That's the kind of man he was. That's the kind of soldier he was. We're all here because of him." There's a small memorial at Dobodura Airfield now. The airfield itself is abandoned, overgrown. The runways are cracked and covered in jungle. But there's a plaque installed in 2001 by a veterans group, in memory of Technical Sergeant James McKenna and all maintenance personnel who served in the Pacific Theater. Their innovation, dedication, and courage saved countless lives. McKenna's modification lives on. Modern P-38s restored for air shows still use it. The commemorative Air Force has 12 flying P-38s. All 12 have synchronized throttles. Pilots who fly them report the same thing Hayes reported in 1943. The airplane turns like it's on rails. The piano wire is gone. Modern restorations use better materials. But the principle is identical. Link the throttles. Synchronize the response. Give the pilot the aircraft performance they deserve. That 6-inch piece of wire changed the Pacific Air War, changed American tactics, saved between 80 and 100 lives. And it started because one sergeant decided that regulations mattered less than people. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. Morrison, Davies, Phillips, all the pilots who died before August 1943, and all the pilots who lived because McKenna decided to act. If you found this story compelling, please hit the like button. It helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from World War II. Subscribe to stay connected with more untold tales of courage, innovation, and sacrifice. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and if you've heard other stories of field innovation during wartime. Thank you for keeping these stories alive. Thank you for remembering the sergeants, the mechanics, and the men who fought not with grand strategies, but with piano wire and courage in the dark.